So in section 13.1, we're going to be taking a look at how do you identify the traits of plants, why plants are so important, and an overview of plant life cycle and the major events in plant evolution. Okay, let's take a look at this. What are plants? Well, from a biological standpoint, plants are multicellular eukaryotes with cell walls made of cellulose. Plant cells also have chloroplasts. We've learned that in previous chapters. And then in addition, they have specialized reproductive organs. That's one of the things we'll look at. There are structures that produce reproductive cells. There are male reproductive organs which produce sperm, and females produce eggs. So we'll take a look at these. So plants are just amazingly important to life on Earth. For example, plants supply food to nearly all terrestrial organisms, including humans. Plants help maintain the atmosphere. They produce oxygen and absorb carbon dioxide. Plants recycle matter in biogeochemical cycles. Plants provide many products for human use, such as firewood, timber, fibers, medicines. A lot of our medicines come from plants. Dyes, pesticides, oil, and rubber. Yes, oils and rubber come from plants. And they create habitats for many organisms. This is an important page, so please make sure that you go over this and you understand why plants are so important to us. All plants have a characteristic life cycle that includes alternation of generations. Well, what does that mean? That means in one generation, the plants reproduce haploid with haploid generation, which means asexually, and in the other generation, they produce with a mixing of genetic material, which is called sexual reproduction. So make sure you know this diagram. This is the haploid part of the life cycle here. This is the diploid part, the sexual part here. Asexual up here with egg or sperm. Diploid, where a mixing of genetic material in the bottom there. So now we're going to talk about the evolution of plants, and this diagram that we have right here is really important. And if you look down here where it says ancestral algae, this means that all plants evolved from plants that started in the ocean. And the first land plants were non-vascular. That means they didn't have any of these tubes running inside. And the most, accessible plant for you probably have seen mosses before. Liverwort and hornwort, also simple non-vascular plants, which were the first to evolve. So take a look at this. Non-vascular plants, simple mosses, think of mosses, basically evolved onto land from the ocean, but did so very early on. Then plants evolved into the first vascular plants. That means that they have tube systems running in that carries materials up and down the plant. And first there were vascular non-seed plants like ferns, and then there were seed plants, but they were like conifers, cone, and flowering plants. So the rest of this section, we're going to be taking a look at the evolution of plants and what things became possible for plants to take over more and more of the land. We want to emphasize that from a simple green algae ancestor that lived in the water, most likely the ocean, plants eventually evolved several major adaptations for life on land. So one of the things we'll talk about going forward here is what were those adaptations. Land plants seem to have colonized as early as 700 million years ago, and the oldest fossils that we have of land plants goes back to about 470 million years ago. So this was just as the Cambrian explosion was beginning. It was really when our planet was approximately a little over 4 billion years old. And the first land plants may have been similar to this liverwort, like this. Notice these are really simple. The cells are here, and there are no lines or veins on them, the way there would be, let's say, on a maple tree or maple leaf. So as I mentioned, plants evolved a number of adaptations that help them cope with the problems of living on a dry land. One of the earliest and most important was the evolution of vascular tissue. So tissue form a plant's plumbing systems. They carry water and minerals from the soil, deep in the soil, to leaves for photosynthesis. Remember, the leaves are on the top where the sunlight is, but they need the water and the minerals from the soil. They also carry food, sugar, dissolved in water from photosynthetic cells to other cells in the plant for growth and storage. Really important adaptation were the plumbing system. We're going to talk a little bit later in the chapter about xylem and phloem. Those are the names of those pathways, that plumbing system inside of plants. We'll see that in a couple seconds. As we'll see another time in this chapter, seed plants emerge, and creating an adaptive seed, evolving a seed, was really, really important. Without the evolution of seeds in vascular plants, with the evolution of seeds, all things changed. Seed plants evolved a number of adaptations that made it possible for plants to reproduce without water. As a result, seed plants were wildly successful. Well, what do they mean by that phrase? What do biologists mean by wildly successful? What they mean is they were able to grow new species and grow all over the habitats of the earth. Why are seeds so adapted? A seed contains an embryo and a food supply enclosed within a tough coating. And so that allows seeds to germinate places far away from the other plants. The first seeds that formed in cones. Cones are made up of overlapping scales. Many of you have seen pine cones, and we'll see some in a few seconds. Male cones contain pollen, female cones contain the eggs. And modern seed plants that produce seeds in cones are called gymnosperms. That will be important. And the word gymno comes from the Greek word which means naked. That seems strange to cause a modern seed plant to call that, but we'll see why. Later seed plants, angiosperms, where they produce flowers and which consist of both male and female reproductive structures in an organ called the ovary. We'll see those. And in many species of angiosperms, which are flowering plants, they develop into fruits. So we'll take a look at some examples of those in a couple minutes. So the first seed plants had cones. The seeds were in the cones. And as these cones fall, take a look at, this is one that has basically, each scale is peeled away from the central cone. The seed is down here. So each one of these little scales has a seed inside it. And this is a gymnosperm, and the gymnosperm was one of the first seeded plants. Here's a diagram where we can compare gymnosperms that we just talked about, pine cones, and notice where the seeds are right down here, and angiosperms. Angiosperms like the fruit tree, like the apple tree. Okay, gymnosperms, gymno means naked. There's no fruit around these seeds. But in an angiosperm, like this apple tree, there are seeds, but then there's fruit around this that allows food to nourish those seeds in the first few weeks and months of life. So that's the difference between an angiosperm and a gymnosperm. Remember, both of these are seed plants. Both of these are also vascular plants. So let's take a look at some numbers here. So first, we're going to look at the living land plants that are non-vascular. Remember, those are mosses, hornworts, liverworts. So how many living species do we have still around today? So for liverworts, we have about 7,000 species around. Hornworts, not as many, dramatically lower, about 150 species of hornwort. And mosses, we have about 10,000. So let's look at the next one. We're looking at vascular plants like club mosses, ferns, ginkgos. The number of living species of club mosses, 1,200, 1,200. Ferns, 11,000. Ginkgos, only one species left. Only one species. Some more vasculars, conifers. So evergreens are about 700 species. Nati are about 70 species. But let's take a look at this. One of the things we talk about in this class is that flowering plants have been wildly successful. Look at this. Look at the number of living species still around today. 258,000 living species of flowering plants. And as it says here, they have a tremendous diversity in size, shape, characteristics. They reproduce with seeds and pollen. For those of us that have hay fever issues, we know that very well. And they produce seeds in the ovary of flowers. Ovaries may develop into fruit, which enhance seed dispersal. And what they mean by that, fruit enhances seed dispersal because it helps maintain that seed living for weeks and months after it leaves the plant. So just a quick summary of what we've been talking about in 13.1. Plants are multicellular eukaryotes. They have chloroplast cell walls made of cellulose. All plants have a characteristic life cycle, which includes alternation of generation. Remember, one generation asexual, the next sexual, the next asexual, and sexual. That's what they mean by alternate. And the earliest plants have thought to have evolved in the ocean from green algae ancestor. Plants were among the earliest organisms to leave the water and colonize the land. And remember, there was nothing on the land when plants came on. And they went to the land and they were able to grow and thrive. The evolution of seeds and pollen allowed them to reproduce on land without moisture. Flowering plants evolved flowers with ovaries that formed fruit. And they've been the most successful plants of all time. Flowering plants, 200 and almost 60,000 species of flowering plant. The most basic division of living plants is between non-vascular, no plumbing system, and vascular plants, which do have a plumbing system. And we'll see that more in the next section. All right, that's it. Please read carefully section 13.1 and good luck on the quiz.